I believe some people are still filtering in, but we can begin as we start already. Thank you all for joining us here today. On behalf of the Global Interagency Security Forum, or GISF, we're happy to welcome you to this session that we've titled Neutrality, Access, and Making Localization Work. We hope that we can have a nice and engaging conversation, despite it being a webinar format, and we want it to be a discussion among peers. Many of our members are here, but it's a public session, so there will be members of the public as well in this session. And yet we still highly encourage your participation throughout the discussion. We've set aside approximately an hour or so for the session's discussion, and we've allocated some additional time in case some of the discussions are extended or there's some additional questions, and it acts as a buffer. My name is Dimitri Katsiris, and I'm the Research and Programs Manager at GISF, and I'll be chairing this meeting today. As I mentioned, it's an open session, so I just want to take a moment to introduce GISF briefly for those who don't know us. We are a membership-led network of 137 international organizations across the humanitarian, development, and peace space, and we focus primarily on security risk management and the safety of aid workers. So we conduct research on this issue, and this is one of the subjects that we're looking into. We host events such as this one, as well as forums for our members, and we generally act as a repository for all things security risk management. I'm accompanied here by our guest speaker, Emmanuel Tronc, who is a senior researcher affiliated with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. He has nearly 30 years of experience in the humanitarian space and has been the head of mission for numerous missions with Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders. And he's led some seminal projects, including one on humanitarian access and negotiations with Conflict Dynamics International, as well as most recently, he's acted as a senior humanitarian advisor for an executive negotiation project with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. He also is the head of outreach and engagement at the H2H network. So he's a very busy man, but has taken the time to help us present on this issue and talk about some of the research that he's been undertaking on this issue over the past several months. I also want to acknowledge that our other guest speaker today, Anaïd Nahikian, will unfortunately not be able to join us any longer. But as noted, we have a wealth of experience and knowledge from Emmanuel to tap into, and so he's kindly stepped in to speak on her behalf as well. Before we get started, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So basically, as it's a webinar function, you won't be able to unmute yourselves, but you can respond to any of the presentation or the discussion in the chat box. And if you so wish to speak, we can try to arrange for you to turn temporarily into a panelist. And I have some colleagues who are helping me in the background, providing technical support. So if you have any questions with any of the functionality on Zoom, please feel free to let us know, and we will try to troubleshoot the matter as early as we can. The event is being recorded, and at the end of this event, we will also be sharing a poll with all the audience members to provide feedback on how you felt it went, and certain you have an opportunity to provide some feedback on future topics of discussion that we'd be able to bring up for future events as well. So today's session, as the title suggests, will look at the intersection of neutrality, access, and localization. Now, these are three pretty major topics on their own and can be talked about ad nauseum separately, but we're really trying to look at the sort of interplay between these. And so specifically, we're looking at how the conceptions, interpretations, and the realities of neutrality as a principle, which we know is increasingly contested, are being informed or are informing the shift towards localization. And looking at how these shifts are impacting access, aid security, and the selection and management of partnerships between international and local aid actors. So this is really where we're trying to frame and ring fence that conversation, and I really hope to stick to that. If we find ourselves diverging, that's naturally par for the course with these type of conversations, but we still welcome questions, even if it doesn't automatically tap into the intersection of those pillars of the topics that we're looking to talk about today. Emmanuel will be discussing a report that GISF has commissioned and that he and Anaïd are co-authors of, and this will be published later on this summer, and it will look at this interplay and try to unpack really how localization could potentially be a vector to strengthen neutrality, access, and acceptance in aid programs. And so this conversation serves as a opportunity to validate the findings from this research, but also get additional insights from all of you among our members and from the general public. And with all that laid out, I would like to pass it to Emmanuel to begin by presenting the key findings of the research. And he's also offered to contextualize some of the challenges that he's bringing up with specific examples from his experience of how neutrality is contested in humanitarian spaces. So please take it away, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, for the introduction, your words, and again, I apologize for the absence of my co-author, senior researchers, and I came today. But we have tried to offer few slides just to provide the main insights of the report. But definitely, I think it does not pretend to cover all the observations and key reflections that came through this long research of almost 9 months of interactions with actors and writings and reflections about this topic. As you said, Dimitri, when we are thinking about humanitarian actions and linking it with the environments, with the humanitarian principles that are attached, there are different stones that are always recurrent, and I think it's important to mention it in the introduction, because it has some de facto some consequences on the way humanitarian actors apprehend and manage, the humanitarian principles, and in particular, the principle of neutrality related to access and action. So, first of all, we are talking about environment where humanitarian needs are rarely reached and met, per se on the daily basis, and particularly I'm thinking about the most urgent needs, what is really at the beginning of an eruption of a humanitarian crisis or a conflict setting, etc. So it's an element very important that's gonna define the way actors apprehended are able to define their role, responsibilities, and limits on the ground. Is going to define this also how they're going to apprehend neutrality in particular. Secondly, we are talking about environment where insecurity and insecure elements are numerous, multiple, and that's where I think it has been very interesting to reflect on how we can link the different topics, and particularly through the expertise of GISF. We are talking about multifaceted challenges where are imbricated very political issues, but as well issues that go far beyond humanitarian responses per se. We are talking about numerous limitations as well, where you have to make some specific choices. And we are talking about all related to the conduct of the conflicts associated to criminality, non-state armed group presence, etc. So just that's factors when we are thinking about neutrality, when we are thinking about access, or when we are thinking about localization, that are extremely at the center of a reflection. As a consequence, you have multiple impacts on civilians and communities that even, I would say, humanitarian actors apprehend on a very limited part. You have also a diversity of humanitarian actors engaged, from various reasons and routes. So that's why it's interesting as well to reflect on the localization or locally led actions by actors. And you have definitely some operational choices and what I would say compromise that are made, to make sure you can do something on the ground on daily basis. In terms of research focus, I think, as you said, Dimitri, we wanted to explore this neutrality, which is probably the principle that is the most misunderstood in the humanitarian sector. By the actors themselves, but also by the interlocutors and stakeholders on the ground. Sometimes we forget, but in the civilian domain or for national authorities, the fact that you do not take sides in a conflict situation or in a situation, it means impartiality. Like in the civilian domain, a judge does not take part and does not take sides, and so is impartial and is neutral. Is seen as neutral. So there is still some misunderstanding, particularly for local actors and national actors, on how we can explain we are neutral in conflict settings. So it's true we wanted to explore and a bit reflect on this concept, and particularly when we are thinking about access and when we try to request an access on the ground to actors. Secondly, there is a reality that each actor has kind of an operational strategy and operational strategies that are evolutive, and where the role of neutrality in these strategies, when you want to operate in a context like Ukraine today or Yemen or Afghanistan, as probably a different color or different tonality when you try to put it in connections with your strategy. So I think it's important to look at it. We wanted to look at intersections with localization because it's probably the mainstream of future of humanitarian apparatus today in the main environments, where the importance to rebalance the leadership and the conduct of humanitarian operations, but as well to reflect on how humanitarian principles play a role for supporting this rebalance and new leadership, or as well create some issues and specific concerns. And the partnership implication, it's true that I will not inform you on anything on the fact that the way humanitarian actors are engaging today with partners, what they call the operational partners or implementing partners of subcontractor partners, have definitely some specific impact on reflections about the neutrality reality and how it's materializing on the ground. So we have tried to look at this on the research, and the key questions that embrace the research are about this concept of neutrality. How is it understood? How is it is implemented on the ground? How it's connected to the operational and acceptance-based strategy? What are the implications related to the partnerships? How it's imbricated to localization, or for a local actor, what does it mean to engage on neutrality, etc., etc. And last but not least, what are the connected link to security dimension, that when actors try to negotiate humanitarian access and humanitarian operations, significant importance on the ground. So in terms of methodology, it has been done through semi-structured interviews and literature reviews. So I don't go too far on this, but just it's pretty classical HHI approach with regards to this. In terms of target and aims of a report and the target audience, so the idea was trying to look at the diverse perspectives on these three dimensions of the humanitarian action, and also to help perhaps GISF to think more on how to navigate with the concept of neutrality and this principle in a more practical manner, and to explore security dimensions of a principled humanitarian approach, which is traditionally very approved by the humanitarian sector and actors. But when you go in details, you know that there are very few actors that can really demonstrate, principles humanitarian approach functioning. In terms of audience, we are talking about leaders overseeing staff security national NGOs. We are talking about individuals managing partnerships as well. So we have discussed with some of them, and staff that are engaging in humanitarian access negotiations and try to make some arbitrage and compromise related to this, and what does it mean. I just would like to share very briefly some findings, but again, these findings are ones to create conversations, but they are not all the findings. But just for you to perhaps to reflect on it, and based on your, I believe you have all of you operational experiences that can support or can also bring some interesting reflection. First of all, I think what is clear is that there are various policies, and we can say the humanitarian sector is driven by operational and I would say institutional or organizational policies, and these policies probably today pay too much or too large, or have a too large, I would say, dominance in terms of when we are thinking about humanitarian access, or when we are thinking about operationalizing what is done. So it's true that the policies are pretty restrictive to limit the risk, to limit also the exposure on various aspects, not only physically or in terms of security, but in terms as well of for the institution. So the consequences are important when we look at it, and it came pretty strongly by international NGOs vis-à-vis donors, by the local NGOs vis-à-vis INGOs, by NGOs vis-à-vis UN agencies, etc., etc. The second perhaps finding that has an interest for the conversation today is that the fact that the organizations, and we see in various context settings that particularly for NGOs do some operational choices, and it's true, avoid the volatile areas where they could be major security risk, or major challenges to develop sustainable programming, and this has some clear consequences regarding the neutrality and also the impartiality associated to this, but definitely for the actors on the ground in environments where there are limited presence of humanitarian actors. On the long run, there are some reflections and misunderstanding about how humanitarian actors can build on the neutrality if they are unable to be present on the ground. I can give you in the conversations various field illustrations about this. And the third thing is perhaps the fact that today there is a priority. I will never succeed in English to say it, but this prioritization of safety of the principles as some issue, and definitely undermined the trust that can be developed among actors, and also this notion of effectiveness. We are in a current era of humanitarian responses where everybody is questioning the operational impact and try to demonstrate its effectiveness, its relevance, added value on the ground, while when we are talking about protracted crises or conflict settings, humanitarian space and humanitarian access in general are pretty shrinking and difficult to support on the long run. So there are definitely some elements related to neutrality. Few last observations before we discuss. There are series of observations in the report when we are thinking about neutrality and localization. First, all around, this local leadership, which is something that remains to be demonstrated, and how to provide, how to let enough space to a local leadership while trying to make sure principled humanitarian responses are there. I think there remains many challenges when we are thinking about this opportunity for local NGOs to demonstrate their principled approach. I would say it's a mutual responsibilities, but probably there is not enough trust and support by international actors to make it happen today. And also probably because they have limited willingness to also to push or to a bit engage with national authorities to respect the presence and the emergence and the legitimacy of independent local NGOs on the ground. The second thing is about going further about this the local actors and all about shifting decision makings and this notion of leadership may confront international actors to standards and to a bit through localizations to some specific challenges where I think it seems to be difficult to imbricate, at least on a rapid manner, the needs of the local NGOs to function as local actors on the ground at frontline, and the expectations by international actors. The third around this neutrality and localization is probably on how the relationships, because neutrality helps managing potential conflict of interest and power dynamics between international and local actors. So the importance on equitable partnerships also is something pretty relevant, and we have seen that as an important observation. With regards to neutrality and security, I would say perhaps 3 points. One is related to security risks. We know that maintaining a neutrality principle approach or just raising your neutrality as an identity, operational identity, can definitely create, a target of security risk and violence against the humanitarian actors. So I think it's a dimension that needs to be more reflected. The second element is all related to protection of aid workers. A neutral stance can offer some protections to aid workers, but in the past decades of field experiences, we have seen that even if you work with a principled humanitarian approach, even if your organization has really some good record in terms of explaining and demonstrating its neutrality, that it's not something that is a protection per se. So I think it's really important to look at all the notion of perceptions, because neutrality, again, it's a principle that is confronted to first perceptions and how any party of a conflict is thinking about the associations between both. And the third is perhaps about security measures that can be adopted, when we are talking about context sensitive security protocols and adapting it to a volatile environment. I think definitely it's a dimension, the neutrality that should be incorporated. The last element is the operational implications when thinking about neutrality, access, and localization. So there are partnership dynamics that are struggling, probably not about the agreements that are able to be reached between the actors, but more about the practicalities, and particularly when we are thinking about humanitarian principles functioning and the neutrality one. How a local actor can show and its efforts to engage on a humanitarian principle approach is something that is not easy for them to apprehend, and perhaps partly under reflected by international actors. And the last one is capacity building. We are talking about a demand by international actors vis-à-vis local actors to really tackle neutrality and principles based on international experiences, and I would say perhaps 40 years of actions by all the actors. While it's very difficult for local actors to have this not only this legitimacy, but its capacity to apprehend all the factors associated to it. So I think it's important. I would say I would not go further on it to open the conversations, but in the report you're gonna be able to read a couple of reflections with regards to the humanitarian community, and first of all high NGOs in particular, but as well with donors. You all know that donors today, institutional donors in particular, have a significant role that they play, not only with regards to the conduct of the humanitarian operations, but as well the humanitarian principles associated to it. And I have some experiences with where I've seen more, for example, sometimes donors or states that were pushing for humanitarian principle approach on the ground than humanitarian actors themselves. You know, if I just take the example of Cameroon and Ambazonia conflict since a couple of years, and at the time 2 to 3 years ago, where I think it's more ambassadors and donors that were pushing for these reflections around principles. So the donors, the series of reflections and about the role they play and what is important. Civil societies as well, and local NGOs, local partners. I think it's important to reflect as well on the specific challenges they face today, because as a local NGOs, you will never have the same concerns and challenges when engaging bilaterally with a political actor or military actor, multilaterally the same, when you go public, when you do advocacy, when you try to negotiate your operational space or operational actions or specific programming. So I think it's really important to look at the reality, the specific realities they face. Couple of also reflections on for security actors, that to mitigate the risk, but as well to engage on specific collaborations dedicated to it. So I don't go too much further on this, because I think its presentation has been a bit long, and sorry for that. But I'm sure you're gonna have many elements to read in the report, and I'm very keen to engage with conversations with you. Thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for that presentation. I will, before passing it on to the audience to really speak up from their perspective, I have a couple of questions tied to some of the observations you laid out, starting maybe with neutrality and localization. You know, when it comes to neutrality, you know, there is the element of considering neutrality in the context or framing of conflict-affected environments and politically charged environments. And so when it comes to how local actors can engage in neutrality, inevitably there will be challenges in maintaining neutrality in those environments, especially if one's own family might be affected. So how do local NGOs navigate these complexities? And are there any specific strategies that you may have encountered in your research that they use to balance their personal connections with the responsibilities that they have as humanitarian actors?
Yeah, the fact is, a humanitarian operations politicize an environment and a context on the ground, and it's true that we sometimes do not realize that the way the local NGOs engage with authorities or harm actors on the ground, and the target they can access is pretty different than the ones that are under the hands or opportunities by international actors. So what I have seen is the fact that we realize that local actors try to be more engaged really on the ground, and avoiding to engage first and foremost, at ministries level, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior in the countries, but trying to demonstrate their added value with regards to act and to demonstrate their neutrality by presence, by engaging with communities on the ground. While international actors, it's true, are more at capital levels, negotiating and engaging, which creates sometimes some parallel as well conversations about humanitarian principles in a context environment. But definitely I've seen more local NGOs focusing and try preserving their operational space by really local ground presence and actions first.
I think you mentioned or alluded rather to this kind of formal and then informal engagement that happens at times, and that's crucial in order to negotiate access. And I just wondered, how do these informal engagements affect the ability to maintain neutrality and gain access, especially in politically charged or sensitive situations and contexts?
The fact is, it's also something that resonates a lot in the conversations with local NGOs. The neutrality is not really under on the discussions when they engage on the programs with the communities per se. What is at stake is really what I mentioned a bit at the beginning, is the fact that in this environment of unmet needs, what can be done in terms of priorities. So, and I would say an informal operational engagement where local NGOs try to balance in different environments their presence and activities, create de facto an understanding of their neutrality, but by the communities. But where the issues start is with the authorities. The fact is, usually local NGOs are seen non-neutral by the authorities, and international NGOs are seen non-neutral first by communities because they don't access in areas, and I think it's easier for high NGOs to show your neutrality at a ministry level than vis-a-vis communities, and it's a bit the reverse for local NGOs on the ground. So, but definitely, informal action do not mean that they do not pay attention to the neutrality notion and as a principle. But I have to say that I have seen more people talking about impartiality first as the principle on which they can have a grip and a demonstrated actions than neutrality per se.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I might have just one more question or two, and then of course I encourage the audience to be able to provide additional questions in the chat, and we'll be able to tackle them one at a time. But please feel free to already jump in if you already have some food for thought there, or some questions that you'd like to raise to the wider audience. Just going back to the localization lens, and you talked about the need for more equitable partnerships, I guess, and enhancing local leadership and raising local actors. But we do know that sometimes the neutrality and so on has to be demonstrated via donors. There's some compliance measures or pressures that are then often passed on to local NGO partners to demonstrate in their work. So how can local actors navigate these sort of demands in a way that allows them to enhance their work and lead in their own right in that partnership without having to succumb to those pressures and using it as a text, like a checkbox exercise?
To be totally honest, if it's my understanding with local NGOs, if they want to really preserve and their partnership and go in the direction of equitable partnerships, unfortunately, there are some sensitive issues they will not raise with international actors and their partners, particularly the way they have to have specific compromise or facing specific challenges at community or militia or armed group level on the ground. And unfortunately, it's the only way they see to preserve their partnership and existence in an environment where we talk more about budget and funding first than really needs, or what does it imply as an organization to be a humanitarian, And it's unfortunate, but that's the way the health system in general is driven today. So I think we should not be surprised that at the end of the day, local NGOs adapt themselves and try to preserve first the financial and partnership commitments they have by avoiding sometimes sensitive issues and the challenges they face on the ground.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I just want to point out to a particular question that has been asked by Neil Elliott regarding neutrality and seeing it that more and more that many local actors are not even trying to be neutral. It gives examples of Ukraine, Gaza, or the non-government held areas in Syria, and that there was a mention of impartiality, which is more pertinent to conversations with engaging with local partners. Do you have any sort of immediate reactions to that?
Yeah, it's true, but I think even if you are today in such a polarized political context like Gaza Strip or Ukraine, actors are not against neutrality per se, but they see as first priorities to operate, and to decide to operate means, unfortunately, you're gonna be in some particular side or some particular corner, and it's more your operations on the long run that gonna give you opportunities perhaps to demonstrate your neutrality. But the fact is, will they have this space? Will they have this time to do it? It's not sure. And again, we should not forget that the existence of local NGOs in the humanitarian sector per se, it's pretty recent. And it's pretty fragile, and their sustainability are extremely limited. If you look at Afghanistan today, if I compare the number of local NGOs that were present 10 years ago and today, and how challenging it is to engage on neutrality per se, to do gender inclusion programming, etc., etc. So it's difficult. So I'm not surprised, but again, we should not see that as a kind of political engagement against neutrality by local NGO. It's more really a practical functional approach, because they are very pragmatic.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up this, because it's this kind of dichotomy between the strict adherence to neutrality as a principle and then the more pragmatic approach that surely needs to be taken when you're trying to operationalize it on the ground. But then it brings up that question about credibility and being to what extent you can remain credible while trying to be flexible without undermining that credibility. So you know what I'm saying? Like there's this kind of a seesaw of sorts between those two. So maybe what are the risks and benefits of adopting a more pragmatic approach when you're considering the principle of neutrality and the importance of that in operations, aid operations in the first place?
Yeah, but I think credibility comes first through actions, program, and the fact you do no harm per se. And after you build this consensus around the added value of your organization. I think you should not believe that MSF has major credibility in the 70s or the 80s. Just implementing partners of the UNHCR and have major difficulties to show any principle approach at the time. But it takes time. My concern is that local NGOs, they don't have the time. They don't have a luxury of time as international had to test, to try, to demonstrate vis-a-vis in many arenas. They are at the corner. They are at the corner on the ground by the national authorities, by the diasporas, by many actors, by the donors, by the international actors that push them in a particular direction. Given this reality, it's very challenging for them to demonstrate and create this credibility on a rapid manner.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you for that. I see another question from Tawana Naharingo. Actually, there's two questions from Tawana based on recent experiences. In some politically charged contexts, local NGO actors on the ground often have breached neutrality through their involvement in political activism, etc. This usually occurs during periods of decreased humanitarian operations. Is there a way of conceptualizing neutrality to enable actors' involvement without compromising humanitarian operations?
Well,
tough questions.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, the fact is, it's a bit my humanitarian experience. I have always difficulties to be too dogmatic on the way we should understand this concept. And again, we are talking about entry doors to operate and to assist population affected. And the fact is, yes, breaching humanitarian principles and neutrality. I think it's an obligation when you want to operate in such politicized or armed conflict environments. You don't have any chance. What is important is the timeline. It's the same with a compromise. How long you're gonna do it, why you do it. And just to be clear about the limits of this and how you can demonstrate that you have made a choice at a time, but you are able to evolve in your operational choices to make sure you are a humanitarian actor per se, and you can demonstrate this humanitarian profound DNA. But I will not, I would say, disqualify local NGOs because on time to time they can breach a bit neutrality principle. And yeah, so for the concept, I would see more concept around this this opportunity to define your responsibilities and limits.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I just noting that for at least one person, there was a bit of a break in communication, but it doesn't seem to be universal. So if anybody has any trouble, please let us know and we'll try to speak louder and make sure that we're able to respond and that you can hear the conversation in the first place, of course. There's another question from Emma Eklund. She says, interesting with the effects of restrictive policies. Are there any reflections on what actions are needed or how to work with policies to be enabling and not hindering? Are there any voices from the local actors on this?
Probably, but again, my only humanitarian experience as a field is with MSFs. But what I see and hearing from local actors is that there are too many policies, and I would say contradictive policies by because local NGOs, they sign operational agreements with Save the Children, NRC, DRC, IRC, etc. They don't have only one agreement on time to time. But the policies are different, among actors, between actors, very different policies on securities, on humanitarian principles, application on humanitarian negotiation, on dialogue with non-state armed groups, etc., etc. So I would say perhaps to break this restrictive policies, perhaps less policies, clarity in the policies, a bit of, we have been good to do standards, in terms of humanitarian responses on talking about quality, but in terms of policies, we are far to be very clear. And policies are complex to understand by staff and are far more complex to understand by local partners in particular.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, compliance-driven neutrality has always been an issue, and it's, I think at the heart of it, it should be more of a moral or strategic issue rather than compliance-driven. So I full-heartedly, I understand completely this challenge here. I'm just waiting to see if there's any other additional questions. Feel free again once more to put your question in the chat box. In the meantime, I can always keep asking some additional questions to spur a conversation. But yeah, please feel free to chime in as you see fit. And actually, there was a comment, because you mentioned at the start that you would provide a bit more of specific contextual examples and said that you would bring that up in the discussion. And I think there was a request to maybe hear, perhaps anecdotally, some of these examples that you have in mind when it comes to this challenge and dilemma of applying neutrality or operationalizing in aid programs.
Yeah, but if I just take a couple of regional examples, when we are talking about the Sahel region, for example, today, that a context environments where authorities in the past 3 to 4 years have changed drastically in terms of engaging with humanitarian actors and understanding, the space for local actors in particular and civil society actors on the ground, and what is really striking today in this context where they are, and the main criticisms by international authorities, by national authorities vis-a-vis the international humanitarian apparatus is the fact they have limited impact, they are very costly, and they first engage with Occidental state decision maker more than local and national capacities and actors at ministry level. When they are thinking about, national actors, they really want them to participate, to support the shift, and to make sure that money actions going to be more driven by ministries level. You have limited number of states authorities today, recipients of humanitarian aid, that are keen to see a huge independence and development of local actors outside, their grip, even with the new Taliban regime rules, even in Yemen with the authorities, in any other context. So they want to sign specific memorandum with local NGOs. They want local NGOs to avoid to do public communication that criticize the authorities, etc., etc. So we are in a period of time where, on one end, you have this emergence of local actors, and for good reasons, and not only for the reasons that international humanitarian enterprise is probably something less innovative and attractive on the long run, but more because many pillars of the functioning of public services deserve new ways of engagement, and through definitely local realities understanding and local actors and local leadership. But what I have seen so far, and what we have seen as well in the research and in my recent experience, that it gonna demand to break a bit a model of international approaches around, where the main bulk of fundings and attention is driven by international actors, to a model that is different, that would be rejected by national authorities for various reasons. And so the equation here is extremely challenging. So and bring some really blockages or handless or tireless humanitarian dissatisfactions, like you can see in Central African Republic, in the Sudans, in Haiti today, where we repeated the same programming with limited lessons learned with the communities, limiting the way of changing a bit the functioning, with the national authorities, etc., etc. One element I would add in my experience at the field is the fact that there are less and less, willingness by international actors to change a bit the policies of national authorities with regards to local actors, and to really push for something where they can respect more the emergence and the legitimacy of local NGOs, local CSOs. All of this, it's because local NGOs are also interested by justice, by human rights, by freedom of movement, by, respecting a bit more their life than only the pure humanitarian actions reality. So, and that's where it's a bit tricky.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. There's a couple of questions actually from two individuals. Hasangani Adema has a couple of questions here. These humanitarian principles are drawn out during a time where conflict was different. And so her question is that shouldn't we update these principles based on how the nature of conflict has changed to include non-state actors and authoritarian states and governments that are emerging? And then a second question, if I may, just to add, she goes, why are we not thinking from the start in terms of how to wrap up humanitarian action? I feel like that would be integral in ensuring and enabling proximate actors to take more ownership. Why are we not doing what we already know that we need to do? So pretty thought-provoking, pretty pointed questions, which we're happy to receive. Thank you, Hasangani.
Yeah, on the first question, I don't think humanitarian principles are obsolete, but we see this obsolescence if we are too dogmatic. If we want to, and I remember when I started with MSF, I was very surprised why the UN agencies, every time in the press release they were mentioning we are impartial, neutral, etc. They were talking we are principled. While in my understanding, as a UN agencies, you are so politically engaged in various fronts that it's difficult to say, oh, I'm independent and neutral and impartial. So if there is a notion of update, I think it's on the way operations are managed, and the way operations are connected to, I would say, your transparency about the challenges you face, the dilemmas, and the limits. Again, humanitarian actors are not so keen to discuss about their own limits. Your own limits in Syria when you engage with the Damascus regime, your own limits when you engage with the Houthis or with the Taliban. There are inherent limits, operationally speaking and institutionally speaking. If you are not transparent with that, after it's going to be difficult to discuss principles. But so transparency on your operational and institutional limits when you sign a particular agreement should be useful to better understand, actors' prerogatives and actors' capacities to discuss principles per se. So if there is an update, it's about this. But and again, probably there is one principle that is fundamental is impartiality, because you decide this impartiality on the way you operate. The other ones, and I know there are many discussions when we engage with Sphere and with different entities that would like to mention a lot principles, but practically speaking, there's no need to mention your humanity if you run programs on an impartial manner, because it shows you are human. You take care about humanity and you take care about impartiality, about neutrality if you try to run on an impartial manner. So independence is something also extremely under interpretation, because the vast majority of the actors today are totally interdependent, first to their donors, secondly to their partners, etc., etc. Wrap up lessons learned. The fact is, talking about limits, talking about handing programs as well, and try to make sure that this we can really create changes. I'm astonished about the number of evaluations in the past 2 decades about impact of programs, evaluating, the activities, the systems, etc. And at the end of the day, very, very limited changes, in terms of functioning. So I know we are in a time perhaps of a new humanitarian head reform under the UN, I would say, guidance in the coming months. But what is clear is that, lessons learned in terms of really demonstrating a major shift, a major change is still to be seen in the humanitarian sector. And it's not done for various reasons, because I think the model is so strong, and international actors have been growing and growing in the past decades, and they are massive today. INGOs are donors as well now today. They are not only humanitarian operators, they are donors to international other actors, to consortium or to local NGOs, So I think the fact all is around fundings has created perhaps less opportunities to really engage on these lessons learned on a transparent manner.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I think there's another question, actually, just before I'll again, once again, encourage others to put your questions in the chat. We've been having some very good pointed questions, which I very much welcome. And there's another one from Neil, who discusses how they're trying to decolonize throughout Oxfam, and that one of the main things that one of the main things is to work with or through partners. So this should remove a lot of the restrictive policies, but on the flip side, it also means that they'd be less pushy on things like humanitarian principles, which many see as colonial. He recognizes that we do not have all the answers as we work through what this actually means, but putting the power to the South may require a fundamental review of many of the principles we have as INGOs. So this is more of a comment responding to Hassan Ghani's question, but it does speak to whether the principles are fit for purpose, how to adapt them, recognizing the importance of localization, and how to actually put truth to word and actually mean localization when we're talking about that, and not have it as something that's another way of imposing compliance or restrictions and restrictive policies.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I would say, at one stage, it's important to trust, local actors, because non-international actors also can say or demonstrate it's purely humanitarian principle defense in any time. I think there have been so many compromise, and I think after what happened in Syria from 2012, I think it will be very difficult for international organizations to say, okay, us, we have a guarantee, or we preserve, humanitarian principles on the ground. I think even for the ICRC, I'm sorry to say.
One point that came to mind when we were talking about neutrality that adds another layer of complexity is the way that social media plays into the perceptions of neutrality for various actors operating in contexts, and the degree to which there's sometimes misinformation or disinformation that can impede or undermine neutrality, and also the added complexity of certain actors within a humanitarian organization that are vocal online, and how to distinguish, their maybe political activism online versus the kind of work in the role that they do within their own organization. I thought maybe, do you have any sort of comments on that degree to which social media has complicated this matter further, and how to maybe address that in some capacity?
It's a very complex reality. And if I look what's going on in Sudan today, particularly on social media, and how even the parties of the conflict, use social media to diffuse misinformations and really attacks. I think, again, humanitarian actors needs to be prudent on the way they use social media, because interpretation, and it's so easy to lose rapidly your credibility, and really after to counter some misinformation is going to be very difficult. So action first, and perhaps some operational discretion on the way you function, and after you can build and tackle some realities from very, I would say, tailored public communication. But it's through social media, is a good vehicle to understand a bit humanitarian needs, and and to exchange with communities and people at local level. But they have some major risks that needs to be measured, and to pay attention to. So I agree, the layer of complexity is far higher for these social media realities today.
Thank you. Maybe another question, maybe tied more to the security aspect. And are acceptance-based strategies a practical solution for the security risks that actors face in conflict zones, or do they compromise neutrality in humanitarian action?
The fact is, what is really questionable is the double standards. And today, when we think about security apparatus and decisions, it's really double standards. I think the security risks taken by local and national staff is different than the ones taken by international staff in many environments and for many organizations, which I think is there. Definitely it has some impact, I believe, on principles in general, and neutrality as well. What is clear is you, as humanitarians, you have to define the minimum security guarantees and environment where you can operate with. It's and nobody is asked to go against or through any security measures, but we need to pay attention on how it is developed, and how you demonstrate that this security policies first create opportunities, first of all, and first for the people in needs, to receive, and do not create additional risk. But again, I will avoid to link it directly on the neutrality, because you can have very restrictive security policies while having major challenges to demonstrate your neutrality, and vice versa. So I think it should be a bit dissociated to make sure you can operate as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Once again, I just want to welcome anybody to ask additional questions. We've had some very thought-provoking questions thus far. I'd very much love to hear from our members as well as other attendees in the audience. But in the meantime, I can keep going. I have a number of other questions that I'd very much like to pose in the meantime. So I think, you know, there's this balance of demonstrating neutrality and making decision-making processes visible in order to demonstrate that neutrality. So what kind of practical steps can organizations take to improve in these areas? And are there any specific tools or frameworks or approaches in your research that you'd recommend based on, you know, your discussions with the various participants who took part in the research?
Well, probably, you know, actors do not operate on their own, and today they should be more, I would say, in-depth conversations about, you know, what does it mean, you know, in a particular environment? And again, it needs to be contextualized, but what does it mean today to discuss about neutrality when you are operating in Iraq or in Myanmar? And what are the implications associated to it? Where I'm always have been surprised is that there are limited conversations among the actors about principles per se. You know, they discuss operations, they discuss coordination, they discuss a bit some advocacy or public statement on time to time, but really on how they are challenged by humanitarian principles, implementation or demonstrations of a humanitarian footprint. It's not always there, and particularly with the UN agencies, particularly among INGOs, and particularly among, you know, I would say the actor that is really the the gatekeeper of principles, which is the ICRC. Again, I never seen many INGOs going to ICRC delegations to discuss a bit how they are challenged in terms of humanitarian principles today. So probably first breaking a bit some walls and having more concrete conversations on the ground, and a bit detach a bit, you know, these principles from dogma or from specific agreement with the donors or others, but trying to find pragmatic approaches with regards to humanitarian principles and try to leverage it and support it on a very wise manner, and particularly with the authorities on the ground, because the idea is not to be against an authority. The idea is to be there to support affected populations, you know, and you don't have at the end of the day to take a particular side on what's going on, even if you can have your personal opinion. So, but it demands again more, I would say, risk in terms of engagement and in terms of capacities to debate, and to debate not by saying just general things, but really to discuss about the tough and sensitive issues. Again, the sensitive issues, sensitive agreements, sensitive compromise. If you remove life-saving assets, medical savings from your ambulances because an authority asks you, you know, you need to explain it to your counterparts, you know, why you do that and what does it imply in terms of principles, for example.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I just want to point out that one of the participants has tried to raise his hand on a number of occasions. Alex Tarazo, I think, yeah, we're going to try to get him to be able to speak up. Alex, please take it away if you can speak to us. Alex, are you with us?
Appreciated.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It has come at a timely manner. So I have a quick reflection regarding humanitarian principles, not only on neutrality, but in regard to access. We have an issue now globally, at a global level. There's a pattern of lack of access. Now, based on what you have presented, it will have been an interest to understand it, to try to understand it from different dimensions. Is it a mechanism failure, or is it a capacity issue, capability issue, or coordination, or a leadership issue? Because whether we are moving forward with the principles on humanitarian space, we are caught up with our own confusion of the mindset of what is humanitarian. We have an issue of humanitarian sector. we have an issue of humanitarian ecosystem and humanitarian space, humanitarian domain. Who is doing what? We have an issue of stakeholders, actors, partners. We have an issue of collaborators. So all this involves or evolves around access and neutrality. If you're engaging a partner and you're engaging a collaborator, you're engaging a stakeholder, and you're engaging an actor, when it comes to neutrality and the principality, it's a whole different game because it has attraction of the space that people are operating. Then we have also a problem on the other three layers. We have humanitarian assistance, we have humanitarian aid, and we have humanitarian support. Who is doing what? Because because I've listened carefully on issue of local actors. Who is fomenting and driving the local actors in terms of access? Is it the international NGOs who comes with the contracts or policies that they need to follow to an idea versus that is non-state actor operating in a space of a state actor? So I will be interested to have your reflection on how can we unpuzzle the issue of norms that we have in the humanitarian versus the operationalization, because the problem where we are having now is not only on the norms and the principles. They are there. They need to be looked at. But the crisis that we are having now is the practicability. How do you move from norms to operationalization that we can constructively engage and unlock access? Everyone is crying on access. So you have the affected population that they need humanitarian support, aid, whatever, assistance, and you have organizations on the other side who wants to flood in assets, aid, and support, but in between, there's no go. There's no go. So how do we reflect around that? Do we need to have a community of practitioners looking at that more intensely? How? Because your study is an eye-opener. And that's why I'm bringing it to you to see how best collaborative action and partnership can facilitate a follow-up on your study. Because what you have presented, it gives a lot of indication that there need to be a further follow-up to include the different issues on different countries based on the global pattern of what we see, Gaza, South Sudan, West Africa, Ukraine, in other areas. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. First of all, I don't really believe that there is an increasing limited humanitarian access on the ground because actors are principal or actors are neutral. Not at all. I think if I just look, the migration realities at the borders of Europe and the way humanitarian operators are blocked by authorities and European unions to get access to migrants. It's not because they are seen as neutral, it's really because there is on one end and another, we have to admit it, a kind of rejection of the, I would say, humanitarian responses in environments where we can authorities and politicians, they were seen as creating an environment that gonna destabilize their own policies, and their own strategies. That's the first thing. And the second thing is there is an increasing rejection of humanitarian head presence, and particularly the international ones, because it's seen as not creating the factors of sustainable capacities for local actors. And probably when you are talking about unpuzzling and working on the practicalities, I'm definitely convinced that humanitarian actors fail to not to engage enough with regards to the ministries functioning and also to at least sustainable programs and development programs. They are one of the major failure of the humanitarian aid workers is that they engage on programs on decades, but they say it's not development programming. So if you are in South Sudan and you engage for 30 years and you continue to say, oh, it's just on humanitarian presence, I think you have totally missed a point, and I can understand the frustration by local authorities in that regard. So probably there is first a change on the way you engage in terms of relationship and partnership with the authorities and the ministries, even if it's difficult to have relationship, but that's the responsibility and duty of humanitarian actors to make sure you create something that is not only a response but also can fundamentally change a bit the realities of staff and giving opportunities. That's the first thing. The second thing is probably around, as we said before, about this trust, and really bet on, and I appreciate, all the things that I've done by Oxfam Care in particular to really shift and leave a context and give this context keys to their local partners now. I have seen them, but there are very few actors that are doing this, and probably we need more pilot projects where we give the keys to local actors. UN agencies as well need to hand couple of coordination and programs leadership that are really detrimental for a rapid shift now. But by saying that, I know that they would probably disagree with me. But I think if I look at all the programs and the challenge today to be really operating on an efficient manner, it's obvious. So yeah, that's the directions, but not an easy answer, not an easy questions for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you, Alex, for bringing up a very important point. I see that we're well past our sort of initial buffer point. We're reaching towards the end. If I don't see any other questions, I'll just maybe ask Emmanuel maybe to answer one last question and then provide some concluding remarks. This is more tied to the sort of future implications of this. We've kind of laid out a number of these layered challenges when it comes to this intersection of neutrality, access, and localization. So looking at the sort of trends in humanitarian engagement that are going on and how they're evolving over this period, what steps can our audience here perhaps take to prepare for these type of changes, particularly in how to maintain neutrality and transparency in increasingly complex environments that they operate in?
Can you come again? The end, I did not hear you very well.
What potential steps that our audience can take, recognizing the kind of trends and challenges that we've flagged over this conversation? What kind of steps can you take now to prepare for these type of changes, and particularly when it comes to the maintenance of neutrality and keeping a transparent, neutral perspective on this matter in complex environments?
In terms of change, I think where I'm a bit concerned is the fact that we continue at international fora, international events to discuss about local capacities, but like it's something we have time to build it, and I don't think we have much time to build it. I think we are very late, and I think local actors deserve more attention about their priority needs, and not only programmatic ones, but really capacities that give us the chance to exist by their own, because as well, I'm always struggling to hear that we believe humanitarian action is going to be developed at local level as the same as it has been developed by international enterprise. But again, local actors want to have more business model as well. They want to be sustainable. They want to gain money. They want to be able to do something useful, but on a sustainable and functional manner. And they know they will never get access to all of these funding mechanisms that are so complex and so today impossible to comply with. So I think this notion of time that we continue to discuss, and we've limited, or we continue to do some piloting stuff. If I remember, since the Grand Bargain, I think there is so limited actions that have been taken, and so my major concern is the fact that it's very slow, and I think it deserves a shift in the dynamic. It should be one of the priority. I think with regards to the principles associated and neutrality, as I said, there is a mix of trust that is very important. But I would say before trust, it's about relationship, and relationship among actors remains competitive, remained very opportunistic, and with limited, I would say, in-depth, functioning, which creates some challenges, and I just give you an example, but even for NGOs, it's difficult to get access to presidents or to prime ministers on the ground or to top decision makers. We are still struggling, to engage with strategic conversations. We have always to fight. How we can imagine INGOs are still to fight with the UN agencies to get access to top leaders or about what's going to be the next deal with an autocratic regime. If it's the case, how can you imagine local actors can have a better chance, than INGOs to have this window of opportunity? So we are still so much lack of equal partner engagement, and really making sure that actors are valued by what they do, that they can bring, more than about this political dimension of the relationships today, which is too preeminent. So I don't know what's going to be the next steps, but what I hope is that there will be significant change, and I think I regret the advocacy by local actors are not enough developed and written. I regret that international actors remains too slow to demonstrate this notion of equal partnership. I will not mention the organization I was in the HQs last week, but they were mentioning a 2030 policies to reach 50% of equal partnership. So again, you see, we are talking about a 6 days time to discuss about 50%. We are far from going fast. So, and in the meantime, I don't believe the authorities will, if they see that, they will take more opportunities to limit a bit the chance for local NGOs to exist. And so it's complex. It has to be contextualized, but we need successes. We need pilot projects that are successful to demonstrate their impact, and so we need to change the way we operate on the ground.
Thank you, Emmanuel, and thanks for tying it back to some recommendations that come out of the report itself. If there aren't any sort of last-minute questions, I'll use the opportunity to conclude this session. Just to reiterate that this report we intend to launch this summer. We'll, of course, be able to share it with you directly once it becomes available. And then there will be a poll that will be shared with you right after this session for you to provide any feedback on what you enjoyed, what can be improved, as well as any sort of support that you'd like to have in terms of getting access to GISF services and its work. All right. With that, I think we can close the call. Thank you all for joining on this Tuesday afternoon or morning if you're in the US side, and very much look forward to continuing to engage with everyone on these particular topics and these interesting issues that we're trying to grapple with. Thanks again, and take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.